We're 3 years here in Boston, and in August of this last year, had my close friend from Pennsylvania come up. He wanted to go deep sea fishing. He chartered a boat in the Boston Harbor. It was this 75-year-old Frenchman with a strong accent, Captain Roger Brousseau. We were going for striper. They weren't out in deep sea. We didn't know enough about fishing to know that. They were just in there around the islands in the harbor. We realized right away that we were going for a different fish than we thought we were going for. This is what he had us use. It's called an umbrella, I've learned. And it's got 9 fish on it. They each have a deadly looking hook in them. Had to let it down in the water at just the right speed so that all these little fish wouldn't get tangled up. We had a mark on the line. We had to let it out 100 feet. We had to let it, because that would put it 6 feet below the surface as we were trolling. And went out into the harbor, and we're hugging all the islands because that's where the fish are. That's where the striper are. They don't hang out in the open water, even of the harbor. They hang around the islands. And Captain Brousseau had a fish finder. He had all the gadgets. He had a fish finder. He had a depth finder. You could see everything down below. Because of his experience, he had a significant network. Other fishermen, commercial fishermen who had been out that morning and knew where the striper were and such. We realized right away that we weren't going for the type of fish we had imagined in our mind. We were going for a completely different fish. We had to be educated on it. We go out to where Roger's intel had told us to go around to find these fish, and nothing. Why? Because Roger's intel was wrong. I guess the schools had moved on since then. Captain Brousseau, he picks up his binoculars and he starts looking around. I said, "What are you looking for?" He said, "Seagulls." So the seagulls were a tell. Wherever the seagulls were, that meant that there were some feeder fish on the top, and the striper would also be there wherever the seagulls were. They had trolled over to where these seagulls were hanging out, and bingo, we start pulling them up left and right. Sometimes we'd pull up 5 of them at the exact same time. We got tired of that. We wanted one we could keep. We asked Roger, "Hey, could you go somewhere where there's one that's going to be big enough for us to keep?" He said, "Well, in the last couple of weeks, we've caught some 4-foot striper out at this one island." He takes us out there. Because they're so large, we can see them on the fish finder. We can actually see them down there. For 45 minutes, we're trolling with this umbrella right past those 4-foot striper down there. And we're going back and forth. They don't even move. Why wouldn't they move? On this umbrella, hanging maybe right about here, was one very short, tiny blade of seaweed. That's the whole reason the striper wouldn't bite. When we think about evangelism as a church, sharing Jesus is incredibly important. Obviously, we can't just be doing social justice projects, helping people feel good, meeting them at their need, but never sharing the gospel of Christ. We want to check off the box. We want to say, Jesus, we're witnessing, we're doing the Great Commission, we're putting something in here, but we're not going to the extent that we need to actually be effective and to bear the heart of God for all these lost, to be effective in reaching them. But we can pat ourselves on the back. We feel good. We put this hook in. We've made an effort, right? Maybe I could have a cooler feeder fish, and I could chuck them in the water, and that might help the metabolic needs or the psychological doldrums of these poor little striper fish in this school. But it's not going to in any way connect them to the rescue boat. It's just throwing them some feeder fish isn't in any way going to do them any good. Obviously, sharing Jesus, we can never compromise that. And that's not on the table. That's got to be in there somewhere. That's the whole point of us being a church, the whole point of the Great Commission. But how we share Jesus is incredibly important. How we share Jesus makes a difference between wasting $500 on a charter where we don't even see a fish and maybe even filling a cooler full of fish. Knowing which fish we are going for and understanding the fish, understanding all the specifics of 100 feet out, 6 foot down, this school, no seaweed on it, all those specifics. We didn't go for the fish that we were originally imagining in our minds. We went for the fish that were there in Boston Harbor in August. How we share the gospel is not more important than sharing the gospel, but it is hugely important. The slightest inconsistency, none of the fish will bite. The striper just watch it go by. They're not fooled. They're not stupid. It make the difference between seeing something that's very appetizing, something that they're going to get hooked on and be connected to the rescue boat, and just sitting there swimming in the current and letting this umbrella go right by them. I spent most of my life in Pennsylvania. I didn't understand New England. I thought Pennsylvania was New England. It's only 6 states, and Connecticut might even be considered on probation. In New England, we have a petri dish of what we're going to see throughout the country. We have a landscape that is so unevangelized, is so jaded. It has such a Catholic influence, and the Catholic influence has turned very sour. The very jaded, post-Christian, postmodern milieu. I began to realize that the attractional church model that I grew up in and love worked great, especially, I guess, since the 80s and especially the 90s, has worked great to bring many people to the Lord. But the attractional model is going to go out of existence within the next few years, the next decade at least, as this postmodern, post-cultural milieu takes over much more than New England. Because in that milieu, they see an attractional model. An attractional model is build a relationship with somebody at work, somebody at soccer, somebody in your community, build a relationship, and as the relationship builds, invite them to church. And that's the way that you go about the attractional model. There's nothing wrong with that. It's worked great. But it doesn't, for one thing, it doesn't really reflect what you see from Jesus. In fact, in the Great Commission, what's the main verb? Go. Go and tell. Rather than, here, come here into our facility and see. One of the things that has happened in our changing culture is our culture sees, in the attractional model, we do excellent services because you want to have something good to invite your friend to. You don't want them to come and have bad preaching, have lame music, have a facility that isn't cared about, that sort of thing. You want it to be a really good experience so that they understand how much we value Jesus. And so maybe it feels like a concert or whatever. And you tear down all the barriers between them and knowing Jesus when you bring them into church. So all your emphasis is really on Sunday morning. In fact, in some churches, it can be up to 90% of their resources going into the weekend gatherings. But what people in our culture see is they see selfishness. They see all the money going towards these nice facilities. And our culture is becoming much more community conscious, much more globally aware. Maybe they don't want to actually go to the work of putting their batteries in a special compartment, but they care about global warming. They might not actually live it out, but they care about community, taking care of the community. And they see this attractional model, and they miss the whole thing that we're trying to build a relationship, bring people to Jesus, take away all the barriers, show how much we love Jesus, make them feel comfortable. They miss all that, and what they see instead is selfishness. They see all the money, all the resources going to the church building, to the church experience. And they see people in their community who are suffering, and they wonder, why isn't the church meeting that? So in the attractional model, generally, the words will change. But you have something like gather, connect, and serve. This is the front door to the church. You bring the people that you have been carefully nurturing a relationship with, or that God has put in your sphere of influence. You bring them together. We do that excellently. Then they connect with a small group, and then they serve. And this service oftentimes is heavy on service on the weekends, not out in the community or something like that, although that may be a developing element. But it's very heavy on, hey, can you be part of childcare? Can you be part of helping with parking? Can you be part of all the different things that go on to make the Sunday morning or the weekend gathering excellent? But our culture sees this as just very selfish, and they want to see this. And this is what they're looking for, true Christianity here. And they see this as just, we want your money and all that kind of thing. So what needs to happen to understand our fish, the fish that God has put us among, the fish God has called us to understand them and bring them in? What needs to happen is we need to completely flip this around. So in other words, it would be serve, connect, gather. And if you put a lot of thought into this, it's a radical shift in everything we do at church, in the way we think about church, in the way we conduct ourselves, in the way we think about evangelism. What's going to attract our striper in our Boston Harbor to Jesus is not a fancy service. It's going to be serving the community, benefiting them, blessing them, being a blessing to the community, having zero agenda being selfless, vibrant in a very obvious way, not self-aggrandizing in any way, not asking for their money. One of the things we did here is stop passing plates because we don't want, they're already expecting that that's all we want. We want their money. The primary way that people are going to come to Jesus and see him for who he really is, not what their jaded Catholic past makes them think that he is by seeing us selflessly serving in the community. And we're not doing evangelism there generally, unless God presents a individual opportunity. We're just blessing them in every way that we can. We're not going for the low-hanging fruit who are familiar with church, like Jesus and stuff, but aren't going to a church. We're going for the people that have no connection with God. He's not even on their radar. They're not even thinking about him. They've been burned on him in the past, or he just doesn't even come up in their thinking. We're serving beside them. We're planting flowers at the town hall. We're picking up trash on the streets. We're showing the community that we love them. We're here to benefit them. And we love them without agenda. We love them just genuinely, selflessly, vibrantly, creatively. We're not trying to get their money. We're not trying to get them to attend a church, nothing like that. Then they start to see how Jesus really lived that way, how Jesus lived that way in the Gospels, how he served and attracted the striper he was among. My second oldest son is about to get married. He's been telling me lately, he says, Dad, I've learned that in marriage, you can either be right or you can be happy. If we think about that with evangelism and the way we do church, I think most of our churches get hung up on being right. We want to look doctrinally pure. We don't want to do anything that could be taken wrongly. We don't want to be associated with evil in any kind of way that people would think badly of us. We have to throw all that stuff out the window. We have to throw the attendance numbers and money numbers and all that out of the window, because it's no longer about gathering. It's no longer about the weekend and those numbers and those metrics. It's all about serving and trusting God to build bridges of trust that will bear the weight of the Holy Spirit's truth in his timing.